theism, etc. The view in which God is everything and or is in everything. And so God is the creator and is the creation. And so on this view, essentially morality is God telling God how God should treat God. And so God is the author, the playwright, the actor, and the audience, and the critic. Now let us consider dualism. And in this view, there's two eternal gods, and this is going to become key. They're two completely separate beings and two completely separate persons. One is generally conceived of as a good God and one as an evil God. And yet, the goodness of the one is measured up against the evil of the other and vice versa. And in fact, each considers himself to be the good God and the other the evil God. And so this absolutely is truly arbitrary. Next to pantheons, polytheism, henotheism, etc. In this view, we have many gods, whether they were created by previously existing gods or not. And again, the key is they're separate and distinct beings, separate and distinct persons. Now, since they do enjoy relationships with other divine beings, they don't necessarily consider human beings creatures with whom they want to have relationships. In fact, they're not exactly famous for their moral relationships as they are infamous for their quarreling. Now, they may view us as playthings, like so many pieces on a chessboard. They might manipulate our fates. They might take human form and fornicate with us, but there's little, if anything, that's considered a moral relationship which they enjoy with us. Next, let us consider strict monotheism. Okay, so in this view, there's one eternal God, one being, one person, completely united, not in the least bit divided. And I think it may very well be argued that this God lacks something, namely a relationship. And so this God had to create humanity to enjoy that which it lacked. And yet, since this God is alone in eternity, relationship is just not a part of this God's being. And so when it creates humanity, it must necessarily concoct an arbitrary moral system for humanity to follow. And lastly, let us consider Trinitarian monotheism. Now, the view here is one single God, so we're not talking about tritheism or a triad or anything like that. And again, the key here being one being, one single unified being, and yet three persons who make up the Godhead. And so there's a unity and then there's a diversity. Three co-equal, co-eternal, coexisting persons. And so this God has eternally enjoyed relationships that are unified within God's single being and yet diverse amongst the persons. And so when it comes to God's creation of humanity, morality is derived directly from God's very nature, his very essence and very character. It is God's very essence because God is a relational being and has been so eternally. So on this view, we have morality being benevolent in that it's derived from God's being one single being, and yet it is relational in that it's enjoyed amongst the persons of the Godhead. And so in this view, this is why it seems to be that everything in the universe enjoys relationships, from the chemical to the animal and from the laws of nature to human beings. Everything, absolutely everything in the universe is in relation, expressing God's relational nature. And indeed, in the New Testament, it states that that which can be known of God, his eternal power and Godhead, can be seen in the things that were made. And so we see from the things that were made that everything is in relation, and it's based on God's very, very nature and essence. His very character is relational and moral. And so the triune God neither adheres to external morality, nor constructs arbitrary morality, since they are a very part of his nature and being, and it is from this that morality's ontology most firmly rests. And thank you, Doug.
Okay, so Mariano claimed that when other species act altruistically or act in ways that appear to sort of foster social cohesion, that it's purely I don't remember his exact words, but I guess he was suggesting that it was instinctual, and he certainly did imply that it was purely because it benefits the individual. I guess the underlying implication that they're not good for the sake of being good, they're good because it benefits them. My challenge to that is, how is it any different in people? There's a book called Wild Justice by Mark Bekoff and Jessica Pierce. Bekoff's an animal behaviorist. Jessica Pierce is a philosopher. It's not available yet in Canada. It's coming out in May. I'm anxious for it. I haven't read it yet myself, but I've seen reviews. Apparently, they build a very strong case. They've observed savanna woodland chimps. They've observed dolphins, elephants, and canines, actually. Believe it or not, canines, apparently, the moral system of canines is much more similar to ours than chimps, in fact, our cousins. Anyway, they basically lay out morality as, look, it's a suite of other regarding behaviors. So it's a group of behaviors that a species has, which regards other members of the group, okay, which fosters social cohesion. And the reason for that is because we all benefit. I mean, if there's one shoemaker in the group, I don't have to know how to make shoes. Perfect. You know, I'll grow vegetables for you and share them, right? That's what that boils down to. A second claim that he made that I thought that didn't make sense to me, he quoted Sam Harris. I guess Sam Harris apparently said something about rape probably played a beneficial role at some point in our evolution. Well, yeah, it may have. I don't know that it did. It may have. I mean, sharks essentially rape. Sharks force themselves on females to reproduce. But sharks don't have metacognition. Sharks don't have the capacity to think about the impact of their actions on other beings. They have a social structure, no doubt about it, but they're not nearly as intelligent as we are. So they're, in a sense, off the hook from our perspective because we know, we have the capacity to say, look, all right, well, if I perform rape, the victim will be harmed, no doubt about it. And everybody agrees that harm is bad. Therefore, it's not okay for me to rape somebody, even though sharks think so. It's not for me. And that's the way it is. Okay, so it's objective. We can say that. Not to mention the fact that, I mean, we know it's wrong in the first place. You don't have to justify that. I mean, everyone knows that. The last concern I have is that, bear with me, I'm going to try, I'm not sure I'm interpreting this correctly. I think that Mariano's claiming that that morality exists in God's essence, as though somehow by being tied to God or connecting with God or acting out God's will, that we become moral beings, if I understand him correctly. My concern about that, but the thing is, at the same time, he admits, well, yeah, sure. I mean, you can map out the parts of the brain that are working when you're making a moral deliberation. That doesn't mean it's the whole picture. Well, no, but Occam's razor tells us that if you have a theory that accounts for everything, there's no point in adding more to the theory, right? Because if it already explains what we have, bringing something else in that we don't know is necessary isn't sensical. So it doesn't seem rational for me to say, well, yeah, maybe this part's correct, but there's got to be something else. If we had evidence that there's something else, like for example, excuse me, my mouth is very dry, pardon me. Mark Hauser, the first guy I talked about who, thank you, Mariano, who was the first guy to do the surveying and theorize that there must be emotions and reason at action in our moral deliberations. He actually, as I said, he also thinks there's probably another faculty, an unconscious one, that we haven't figured out yet, just like Chomsky argues for the grammar, right? So yes, I'm not suggesting that we know exactly, literally what morality is descriptively, but we certainly do know at least part of it. And I don't see a reason for bringing a God component in. I just don't see it. Thank you.